It's election season, that means it's polling season, and the latest polls make interesting reading. I want to do a couple of videos looking at some of the different aspects, all right? And as always, I'll be telling you what I think. I want to hear what you think. Drop your comments below. Thanks for joining me. I'm Dionne Jackson-Miller. Time for tea. So back to politics, and I'm saying back to politics because my last video, if you haven't watched it, was a really nice video about hiking with lots and lots of gorgeous photographs of nature. You should go and watch it. This is what it looks like. I'll link it below as well. Also link it at the end of the video. Go watch it, man. It makes a nice change of pace. But in terms of what we're talking about today, it's the polling. So when we do polling, and when I say we here, I'm speaking about the RJRGLEANER communications group that I work for. Not talking as a pollster, just as somebody in the newsroom who sometimes helps to figure out some of the questions we want to ask. Because when we do polls, we ask two kinds of questions, right? One set is a pretty standard set of questions that we ask from poll to poll across the years. So we'll ask, for instance, how would you rate the performance of the JLP? How would you rate the performance of the PNP? And that question, of course, gives us a sense of how well people think the parties are doing, the government and the opposition. Then we'll ask, how do you rate the performance of the opposition leader, and how do you rate the performance of the prime minister? And because our politics is very leader-focused, leader-centric, it's important to know what people think of the political leaders, because sometimes people vote for a leader, they vote for who they want to see as prime minister sometimes. And of course, the big one, if an election were called today, which party would you vote for? That's what everybody wants to know. We call those the party standings. And those kinds of questions we're pretty much, as I said, asking every poll so we can do comparison, you know, how were the parties doing 2 years ago? Who did people want to vote for a year or two ago compared to who they want to vote for now? What are the approval ratings like for the leaders? Have those been going up or down? Then now we ask another set of questions which are really looking at topical issues at the time. So for instance, if people want to remove the king, what people think about the Caribbean Court of Justice, what people think about the state of the roads, light, water, stuff like that. And these kinds of questions are going to change from time to time because we're just trying to figure out the kind of thinking of the people on these very current topical issues. This video is not about defending polls, right? Saying whether they're good or bad. I'll leave that to other people. I do think they're very useful. I do not think they're infallible. And in response to the question I always get, or the comment, Dionne, I've never been polled. I've never been interviewed by a pollster. Look, all I can say is, one, I have been approached more than once by pollsters. I don't answer, I don't participate because people know me. I'm not going to be answering those kinds of questions. But also, remember, we have 2.8 million people and counting in Jamaica. So it's completely understandable that you may never have been polled, given that the average size of the sample that's polled is like 1,000 to 1,200 people. So Don Anderson's pollsters were out in the field asking questions from January 30 to February 12, 2025, and they polled 1,201 registered voters, and the margin of error is plus or minus 3%. What that means is that if the poll says 30% of people said they would vote for the Big Up Jamaica party, the true figure could be anywhere from 30 minus 3, that's 27%, all the way up to 30 plus 3, which is 33%. So let me make a disclaimer here, because we ask a number of different kinds of questions, and at the end you do want to look at all of them together to see how they relate and how one, looks beside another. So for instance, if you ask the question, is the country going in the right direction? You're going to want to look at the results for that and see how they stack up, for instance, to the voting intention, who people say they're going to vote for. So if you see something where people are saying the country, a whole heap of people saying the country is going in the wrong direction, but then they say they're going to vote JLP, it's going to be like, does that make sense? This video, though, is just about people's views on the performance of the parties and my thoughts on that. So the questions were, how do you rate the performance of the JLP as government, and how do you rate the performance of the PNP as opposition? These are the numbers for February 2025. 20% of people said the JLP was performing very poorly. 17% said it was performing poorly, for total negatives of 37%. For the PNP, 19% said the PNP was performing very poorly. 27% said it was performing poorly, so their total negatives were 46%. 33% of people said the JLP's performance was average. 37% said the PNP's performance was average. Now, when you look at the positives, 17% said the JLP's performance was good. 13% said very good, so their total positives were 30%. On the PNP side, only 10% said their performance was good. 8% said very good, so total positives of 18%. So neither party really getting an overwhelming round of applause there from the public, but when you look at it, the JLP's numbers obviously better than the PNP's numbers in terms of performance. So for a government that's been saying, hey, we're doing so many great things for the country and the people, wouldn't they expect their positive rating overall to be more than 30%? And then, of course, the PNP, which is trying to get into power to form the government now, their overall performance positive rating of 18% is even worse. A couple of things though. I do think it's much easier to form an opinion of how the government is doing compared to your opinion of how the opposition is doing. I'm never too sure if people really have a clear idea of what the opposition is supposed to do. And if you don't know what they're supposed to do, how can you rate them adequately or accurately? A huge part of the opposition's job is to hold government to account. How many people follow Parliament to say which opposition spokespersons or MPs are speaking out? Who is putting questions to ministers, bringing private members' motions on behalf of their constituency, issuing position papers, making policy proposals? And since the PNP is saying they don't want to put their ideas out there too early because they're afraid government thief them, I'm not sure how much ground or material people really have to rate them on. When it comes to government now, you can see the economy, you can see what's happening with crime, you can see what's happening with the roads, and I think it's much easier to get a very clear idea of if you think government is working or not working. Now, there is another way to look at the numbers if we go back to the tables. Now, if you say, for instance, you want to look at what let's call non-negatives together. If you add the people who said the party is doing an average job with the people who said they're doing good or very good, then it would be 63% saying the JLP is doing average or good or very good. 55% would be saying the PNP is doing average or good or very good, which certainly sounds better for both parties. Whether or not it actually is better in actuality in how people are viewing them, we can talk about. So, having said that, let's go back a couple of years and see whether perception of the performance of the parties has changed. I'm going to use 2022 since that was about a year and a half or so, or a little under that, since Mr. Golding was elected PNP president and named opposition leader. So by then he would have had a little bit of time to settle into the job. So when asked how would you rate the performance of the PNP as an opposition, I'm going to read for you the July 2022 figures and you'll see February 2025 beside. All right. So in July 2022, 20% said it was very poor, 26% said poor, so there were total negatives of 46% for the PNP in July 2022. 38% said the party was doing average in July 2022. 10% said good, 6% said very good, so their total positives in July 2022 were 16. How would you rate the performance of the JLP? In July 2022, 14% said their performance was very poor. 16% said poor, so they had total negatives of 30%. 37% said their performance was average. 23% said their performance was good. 10% said very good, so their total positives were 33%. So between July 2022, little less than halfway through the term, and February 25, when we're within striking distance of the general election, really and truly, neither party has shown much movement at all in public perception. I'm not saying no movement, not saying that, but really and truly, not really no huge performance on either side. The PNP's total positives remained really low, inching up from 16% to 18%, which is, by the way, within the margin of error, so no statistically significant difference there. Their average rating is almost the same, 38% and 37%, and their negative rating is exactly the same, a high 46%. For the JLP now, again, their positive rating doesn't show much difference. There was a 3% fall from 33% to 30, just within the margin of error. Their average rating fell from 37% to 33%, and their negative ratings increased from 30 to 37%. So if we look at the non-negative numbers now, putting average together with good or very good, average plus good and very good for the JLP went from 70% in July 2022 to 63% in February 2025. So they lost some ground overall. Average plus good and very good went from 54% from the PNP in July 2022 to 55% in July 2025. Really just about the same. So the real takeaway, neither party impressing the voters very much. Nothing they've done in the last 2 years has moved the voters much, although overall the JLP's numbers continue to be better than PNP's numbers, but the JLP has also lost some ground. This particular poll, right, and the issues it raises, raise two different set of concerns. The most immediate would be, what does this mean for election day and how do they relate to party standings? Because sometimes we see what looks like some inconsistencies between different types of questions. Also, a question it raises for me is somebody who rates a party average. You know, does that influence how they vote? Are they more or less likely to vote for that party? What if they rate both parties average? Then what other factors come into consideration for them to try to figure out who they're going to vote for? And I know if you do really detailed and sophisticated number crunching and analysis, you can get answers to all kinds of different kinds of questions. But even without that level of analysis, there are still issues that are raised that we can look at and think about. Because if we look away from election day, who going to win on election day just for a moment, I think there are two issues that are raised here. One, again, we have to continue to educate people on government, the role of government, what they're supposed to do, the role of MPs, the role of the opposition. Because how can you figure out how well somebody is doing if you don't know what they're supposed to do? How can you demand better if you don't know what they're supposed to be doing? And the second thing is that I do think we should always be looking at the performance of both sides to figure out who is doing well and who needs to do better. So are we satisfied with the job they're doing, how they're representing their constituencies, you know, what kind of legislative work they're doing in Parliament? Are they bringing forward policies and laws to address the needs of the country? And they're not just criticizing, but also making counter proposals in the case of the opposition. One of my main points of contention was the quality of the debate they're bringing to Parliament. In many cases, is low. And all of that is important because, to quote the great Lloyd Lovindeer, them work for we not work for them. And we are hire and we are fire them. And for we money, we are watch them spend. Alright, so when me start singing, you know, say video done. Alright, so do like the video, share it with somebody you think might be interested, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. All of that helps us grow. And of course, click that little notification bell so you know anytime I drop a new video. I'm Dionne. I'll see you next time. Go and drink my tea.